She made soup. He chopped wood. Nobody mentioned the child in her belly. He lived alone in the Timberhorn Mountains, where men didn't talk unless the wind told them to. She showed up pregnant and silent, with nowhere else to turn. He didn't ask, just opened the door and pointed to the firewood. What started as a way to survive became something more. No vows, no kisses, just the kind of quiet that never leaves. The first snowfall came early that year, quiet as breath. Boone McCready watched it sift down like the slow collapse of memory. He sat on the porch of the timber cabin he'd built with hands that no longer ached, only forgot they ever could. A weather-worn board hung crooked from a nail near the door. Burned into it were 4 words: cook needed for winter. He hadn't meant it for anyone in particular, maybe not even for a person, maybe for time itself, for fate, or for silence to finally leave him be. Timberhorn Mountains loomed behind the cabin like broken spines. In town, they called him the Mountain Man, in the way you'd speak of something best left unbothered. He hadn't stepped foot past the general store in over 2 years. Didn't plan to, but that day, just after noon, a knock came. 2 firm raps. Not timid, not demanding, just cold. Boone opened the door. A woman stood there, wrapped in a frayed wool coat too thin for the wind, her boots caked in the last of autumn mud, a belly round with child under the coat. Her face was wind-burnt, jaw set tight like someone bracing for something that had long since happened. He looked at her. She looked back. She didn't speak. Neither did he. In his mind, something old stirred, a name he hadn't said aloud in years, but it wasn't hers. The woman squinted against the wind. "You still need someone to cook?" Boone didn't nod, didn't blink, just stepped aside. "Woodpile's round back," he said. She stepped in like it meant nothing, like it meant everything. The door shut behind her, slow and final. Later, while she unpacked her bag, a worn satchel, mostly empty, Boone chopped wood. The sound of axe hitting pine echoed against the trees like distant shots. That night, she made a pot of soup. It tasted like silence, like roots and water and something warm in the throat that wasn't food. They ate in silence. No questions, no names, just the scrape of spoons and the soft hiss of snow melting on the stovepipe. Afterward, she found a room down the hall. It had belonged to someone once, a wife, a name carved on the underside of the bed frame. A dress still hanging behind the door, brittle as old leaves. She didn't ask. Boone sat in the dark and stared into the fire until the wood fell in on itself, and the cabin smelled of smoke and pine. The snow kept falling, erasing the tracks that had led her here, and maybe that was the point. She stirred the pot like it was something she owed the silence. Boone split logs out back, the axe rhythm steady as breath, as if keeping time with something buried and long unwilling to die. Between them stretched the cabin, thick, timbered, drafty, clean in the way old grief is clean. Her name, she hadn't said. His, she hadn't asked. The only thing between them was that belly of hers, round and full of a truth neither one intended to touch. On the second morning, she found his boots drying by the fire and left them alone. When she wiped the counter, she didn't move the tin cup he always placed at the edge. It wasn't habit, it was truce. Boone returned, arms full of logs, snow caked into his beard. He stomped the cold off like a man who didn't care if it stayed. "You like split peas?" she asked. He didn't answer, but he sat down and he ate. Later she swept the floor. The brush caught on a warped board, and beneath it she found a child's wooden block. One corner was blackened. She placed it on the mantel without a word. At night, she didn't cry. That was the strange part. Boone had heard crying before, wives, widows, wanderers, but this one was quiet, like she'd already done her mourning somewhere else and packed only the echoes. She curled herself into the far end of the narrow bed that once held another woman's shape. Her hands rested on her belly like they were holding back a question that wouldn't ever be asked. Boone sat in the living room, sharpening a hunting knife he hadn't used in years. Steel on stone, steady as clockwork. His dog, long dead, used to curl under his chair. Sometimes at night he still reached for the sound. She lit the oil lamp without needing to be told, knew how much wick to trim, knew not to waste it. Her fingers bore the memory of kitchens, poor ones, tight ones, places where people didn't speak unless there was something to say, and even then it wasn't said twice. He watched her once from the porch just for a moment. She stood still under the weight of falling snow, one hand on her belly, the other holding a pot of water. She didn't look cold, she looked resigned, like the mountain had already taken what it wanted from her, and she'd come only to finish out what was left. Boone turned away before she caught him watching. They passed 4 days like that. Soup and fire, chores and silence. On the 5th, she found a coat in the back closet and wore it out to chop kindling. The sleeves were too long. She rolled them up, said nothing when he took the axe from her hands and showed her where to strike. Didn't smile, didn't flinch. That night she rubbed her lower back in the firelight. Boone looked once, looked away. "You got someone waitin'?" she asked. First time she'd spoken more than 5 words since arriving. He paused. "Did?" She nodded, didn't press. "I didn't steal nothin'," she said after a while. "Didn't run neither, just walked it till there wasn't more walkin'." He said nothing, but he pushed another log into the stove and stirred the coals like he meant for the heat to say what he wouldn't. Outside, the wind groaned across the roof, carrying no answers. Inside, the belly stayed silent and no one gave it a name. She stood with the pantry door open, counting jars that had too much air in them. A half sack of oats, dried beans that smelled faintly of rot, a tin of baking soda with rust around the rim. She said nothing. Boone watched her from the corner of the room, sitting in the chair that creaked like an old verdict. His hands were calloused, dark-lined with dirt that soap no longer reached. He watched, not like a man waiting for complaint, but like one expecting none. "We're low on salt," she finally said. He didn't blink. "We got lye. You can soak the pork longer. I was thinking I could ride down to town. It ain't far." He didn't move. "I don't go to town." She met his eyes. They were pale, like river stones pulled from under ice. "You don't have to," she said. "Nay, I do." "No," he said, "you don't." Silence again, thick as cold stew. She set down the jar she was holding. There was something in the way she did it, not angry, not gentle, just final, like all the decisions she'd ever made before this one had led her to that motion, and nothing was going to be louder than it. He stood, took a step toward her, slow as snowmelt. "I don't go," he said, voice low, "because the last time I went, I came back with nothing but a coffin-sized silence." He didn't say more, didn't need to. She didn't ask who died. The dead don't need introductions. That evening she baked something anyway. Oat biscuits, half crumbled, half burnt. He ate them like they were better than they were. She noticed. The next day she found an old saddlebag in the shed, dusted it off, quiet about it, packed what she could, beans, flour, a folded cloth that used to be a curtain. He didn't stop her, but the next morning the horses were gone. Tracks led into the snow-blown forest, then vanished like ghosts swallowed whole. She didn't speak of it, but that night she took to boiling bones again, long after the meat had left them. She chewed on silence like it was a last meal. Boone split wood until dusk. His knuckles split too, red against the pale bark. She saw him standing by the porch in the dark, snow drifting down. His shoulders didn't rise or fall, just stayed there, fixed in place like the mountain behind him, unmovable. "I wasn't going to run," she said from the doorway. He turned just enough for her to know he'd heard, then turned back again. In the morning, she found a sack of flour on the table. It hadn't been there the night before. She touched it like it might vanish. Said nothing, but when she made biscuits again, she left one out on the rail of the porch. Cracked, warm, open like a thank you. Boone didn't eat it, but the next day it was gone. Neither one mentioned the town again. The snow came harder now. Wind pressed against the cabin like a dog that wanted in but wouldn't stop biting once it got there. Shutters groaned in the night. The roof ticked cold like a clock with no future in it. Clara was kneading dough with sleeves rolled up to her elbows. The fabric clung to her arms, stained with flour, heavy with steam from the stove. She moved slow, deliberate, like she wasn't just making bread, but pressing her weight into the day, trying to make it hold. Boone sat near the hearth, sharpening a blade that had lost its edge sometime back in another season. The sound was soft, metal against stone, over and over like a lullaby made for wolves. She stood up, wiped her hands on the hem of her dress. There was an old stool by the door where she left her scarf, gloves, and a handkerchief she hadn't noticed had slipped loose from her pocket. She didn't speak much that day. He didn't either. That night, when the wind howled louder than usual, she found her handkerchief folded, neat, careful, laid out on the kitchen shelf beside the matches. She hadn't put it there. She looked at Boone. He didn't look back. But the day after that, she saw the door to the spare room had been repaired. The latch, rusted and stubborn, now moved clean. She tested it twice. It no longer stuck. No words were said. She swept the floor until the wood showed again. Hung the curtain back over the cracked window. She even mended the quilt that lived on the back of Boone's chair. Sewed it with tight little stitches, fingers moving like memory. No questions asked, he noticed, but not with his eyes. He fixed the leak above the stove and patched the corner of the roof. Not for himself. The weather had never bothered him, but now there was someone here who folded cloth the way you'd wrap a wound. They never said they were building something, not a home, not a truce. But winter pressed them into the same silence, and inside it they made room for one another like two old dogs figuring out how to share the same porch. One morning Boone salted the steps. Clara noticed her boots weren't wet. One evening Clara left a second cup on the table. He drank from it without asking. Nothing happened, and yet something did. It moved slow like spring thaw beneath snow no one thought would melt. There was a wildness to the quiet, like neither of them trusted what would happen if they spoke too much. She left the same handkerchief on the table again. This time on purpose. The fire that night burned low. Clara didn't add wood, and Boone didn't ask her to. Sometimes a room needed cold to make the silence honest. She sat with her hands in her lap, fingers twined tight like she was holding onto something only she could feel. The chair creaked under her, the kind of sound that came not from the wood, but the memory sunk into it. Boone sat across, working a leather strap through a buckle. He didn't look at her, but he hadn't looked away all night either. There was something circling between them, not a question, not an answer, just the waiting thing that lives in old wounds. Clara spoke first. "I wasn't always Clara May." Boone's knife stopped, didn't lower, didn't rise. "They called me Claire Dobbins once. Claire of the 7th Hill, Daddy used to say. Had 7 hills behind our homestead in Missouri, dry and mean like mules with no pasture. He always said if a man can build on the 7th Hill, he can outlive his past." Boone said nothing. The fire popped. Somewhere outside, a tree shed its snow with a soft thump. "I never got to that 7th Hill," she said, "only made it to the 4th. And then I met a man with a fine coat and a crooked mouth. Said he'd take me the rest of the way." Boone returned to the buckle, slow. "He gave me a child," she said, hand resting on her belly. and a bruised lip, and 3 nights in a barn after he sold the mule and the cart and forgot to come back. Still Boone didn't speak. I was 5 months in when my ma shut the door on me, said she couldn't feed both me and my shame, told me to go find the crooked mouth if I wanted supper. Her voice wasn't angry. It was quieter than that, like a woman who'd already screamed and cried and dug a grave for both. I walked until my feet stopped bleeding, then I walked some more. She looked up. Boone was staring at the fire. His hand had stopped working the buckle. She said, "I ain't told this to anyone. I didn't think I would, but something in this place, it don't press me like the world does. It don't ask me for nothing, not even my name." Boone stood, walked to the hearth, and threw on a log. Flames caught like they'd been waiting for permission. He didn't offer pity, didn't say sorry. He just poked at the fire until it settled into a steady burn. Then he sat back down, the same way he always did, like a man who knew every chair could be the last one you sat in. Outside, snow had begun again. Quiet, slow, relentless. Inside, 2 people breathed through the ache of memory and did not drown. The dog had been dead 6 winters. Boone never bothered to replace it. A dog barked when it was afraid. Boone had long ago decided fear wasn't a sound worth making. That night, the wind dropped sudden, like a warning, the kind the woods gave before something came out of them. Clara lay on her side, a hand on the swell of her belly. The fire in her room still crackled, but the logs were near gone. She blinked once, then again. Something had stirred outside. Not the wind, not a branch. Something with weight and thought. A shadow passed across the sliver of moonlight, leaking through her window. Slow, careful, measured like a thing that's hunted before. She sat up, eyes wide, heart pushing hard in her chest. She didn't scream. Boone was already up. She heard the floor creak in the front room. No boots, no voice, just movement. A moment later, the door opened. A breath of cold knifed in. Clara pulled her quilt tighter. She heard nothing else. Not footsteps in snow, not boots in dirt. Just the kind of silence that came before old things remembered what hunger was. She got up, crept to the hallway. Boone's coat was gone. The rifle was gone, too. She leaned to the window. He was out there. A figure in the dark, standing still under the eaves. One hand held the Winchester, pointed down. The other rested loose at his side, waiting, not trembling, not even breathing, it seemed. Whatever it was out of her sight. But she could feel it, too. Not a wolf. Wolves came quick, sharp, noisy. This was something else. A crawler, a watcher, the kind of thing that stayed just outside firelight, but always within knowing. It circled. Boone shifted only once, lifted the rifle slow, like a preacher raising a book no one wanted to hear read aloud. Then nothing. No shot, no growl, no cry, just wind returning, and Boone standing there until the cold began to blur his edges. When morning cracked its brittle light over the ridge, she found him on the chair beside the fireplace, still dressed, still holding the Winchester upright across his lap. Hat pulled low, snowflakes melting slow on the brim. She didn't wake him, just sat on the rug, back against the hearthstone, watching the flames fight to stay alive. Somewhere in the trees a track had been laid. 4 toes, wide gate, too heavy for coyote, too smart for bear. Boone didn't mention it, and neither did she. The morning was cruel, the kind that settled on a man's shoulders and whispered that it'd be back again tomorrow. Boone was chopping wood with slower strokes than usual, not because he was tired, but because something in him had started counting time differently since the blood moon passed. Clara moved slower too, but not from snow or sleep. It was her breath, short, tight, coming in shallow waves like her body knew a storm long before the sky turned. She didn't say a word, just stirred oats, wiped her hands on her apron, then sat down like she meant to get back up, but didn't. Boone saw it, the way a hawk sees something twitch in tall grass. He didn't say a thing, just finished his split, leaned the axe against the stump, and walked back inside. She was hunched now, both hands clenching the table edge, knuckles gone pale. When he stepped in, she looked at him the way a woman might look at a thunderhead that didn't belong in that part of the sky. "I think it's coming," she said. Boone didn't blink. He moved to the stove, grabbed the kettle, filled it with snow, and threw it back on the flames. No hesitation, no wasted motion, just a quiet gear turning inside a man that hadn't turned for anyone in a long while. She gripped the chair, then stood, then leaned. Her eyes were wide, but not scared. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "I do," he said. And he did. Not like a doctor, not like a husband, but like a man who knew things break in silence and you better have your hands ready when they do. He laid out rags, boiled more water, tore old linens into strips with fingers thick from wood and gun. He stoked the fire, moved the cot closer, every act methodical, grave, like prepping for war. Clara screamed only once, and then bit down on the cloth he handed her. She grunted. She sweated. She clawed the timber wall when the pain came in waves. Boone stayed close, but not too close. He gave her space the way men give wild animals space when they're in pain. Respect, not fear. Outside, the wind howled. Not cold wind, mean wind, the kind that carried memory. She bled. He didn't flinch. She screamed. He didn't speak. The baby came fast in the end, covered in red and life and something ancient. Boone caught it in his hands like catching rain in the desert. Clara gasped. The baby cried. And so did Boone. Not loud, not even sound, really. Just a long, shuddered breath that left something behind when it came out. He wrapped the child in a flannel he'd kept since before his wife died. Didn't ask why he kept it, just did. She looked at him. Her voice broke, but her eyes held. "What should we call him?" Boone didn't look at her. He stared into the fire, then out the window at the little frozen creek that wound behind the cabin like a forgotten road. "Little Creek," he said, and that was that. Boone brewed tea before dawn, 3 cups. That morning like the morning before it, and the one that had come after, he set out the same battered mugs on the table, one in front of his seat, one where Clara sat, one between them, where Little Creek's name was still only in the wood grain. The child was wrapped in blue cloth, sleeping in the hand-carved cradle Boone made out back under the big spruce. Took him 3 nights, no nails, only dowels and patience, same way his father used to build fences. He didn't ask Clara what she thought of it, didn't need to. The way she placed her hand on the smooth edge told more than words could have. Boone's movements had changed, slower in some ways, but more deliberate, the kind of slow that knows the weight of consequence. His boots came off at the door now. His rifle leaned in a different corner, not forgotten, just not needed every minute. The cabin had sounds now, not loud ones, but life sounds. The gurgle of a baby dreaming, the soft scrape of a spoon in a bowl, Clara's humming when she thought no one heard. He heard. Boone fixed a loose board on the porch step and didn't say why. Hung a strip of canvas over the window to keep the draft off the crib. Oil lamped the hallway so she wouldn't stumble in the dark. She saw it all. Didn't say thank you. But she baked bread that morning, real bread with a crust, the kind that fills a room with memory. When Boone sat, Clara poured tea into all 3 cups, without flinching. Boone looked at the 3rd cup, watched steam rise and curl and vanish. He didn't drink from it, didn't move it, just let it sit there. Little Creek stirred. Clara rose, lifted him from the cradle, held him like something both breakable and sacred. She didn't look tired anymore, just full. There was a quiet between them that wasn't absence, but presence. The kind of silence that holds things. Grief, hope, maybe both. Boone finally spoke. You name him yet?" Clara looked down at the boy. "I was thinking I didn't have to," she said. "Someone already did." Boone didn't smile, but he didn't turn away either. He nodded once. Outside, snow drifted soft against the glass. The wolf hadn't come back. The wind was quieter now, not gone, just at peace for the moment. That night, Boone laid another log on the fire. Clara placed the baby in the cradle. They sat, not across from each other, but closer than they'd sat before. The third cup still sat on the table, still warm. And for the first time in years, Boone didn't mind that it was. Clara wrote the letter after Boone fell asleep. She sat at the edge of the kitchen table, the baby swaddled in the sling across her chest, breathing in rhythm with the fire. A lantern hung low, barely casting light. The house held its hush like a chapel. Wood groaning in the wind, the soft tick of boiling pitch in the logs. Her handwriting was slow, uncertain. "Dear Mama." It had been months since she spoke those words aloud. She didn't write about Boone. She wrote about the quiet, about the trees that bent with snow, about the sound of boots left by the door, about the way someone had made a cradle with bare hands and shaped wood with grief. She wrote about a man who never once touched her without asking, and how strange that was. She wrote about a boy who didn't have a name until someone else gave him one, and how it fit. And she asked finally at the end, "Do you still think I'm worth less than the silence I carry?" She folded the paper once, then again. The baby stirred. Clara brushed a thumb down his cheek, felt the warmth. When Boone's shadow crossed the room, she didn't startle. He didn't ask what she was writing, just walked past to the hearth, stoked the fire, and stood there with his back to her. Clara rose, moved slow, cradled the letter in one hand, held it over the flame. It caught with a whisper. Boone turned just slightly as the corners browned and curled, lifting in heat. She met his eyes. Didn't explain, didn't need to. Some things weren't meant to be sent. Some things weren't meant to be heard. Boone nodded, just barely, and went back to the window, checking the wind. The next day he hung a bell chime above the door. Simple copper tubes strung with a strip of leather. It rang only once in the breeze, then fell silent. She didn't ask why, but she stood under it for a long time, her hand on the wood frame, the boy at her breast. Spring would come. She knew it. She could feel it pressing up under the frost. Birds starting to call faintly in the early morning. She had once promised herself she'd leave. Promised she'd walk out as soon as the road cleared and the boy had his strength. But that morning she took the ashes of the letter and scattered them in the fire pit outside. Not to bury them, just to make room for something else. Inside, Boone brewed 3 cups again, and she set the table like it had always been that way. No one said anything, but the baby cooed when the bell chime moved. The wind shifted on a Wednesday. Boone knew before the wolves did. The birds had gone quiet. The pines bent like they were listening to something far off. Something wrong. He stood out front, coat open, rifle still hung above the mantel behind him. He didn't reach for it, not yet. Clara was inside, boiling clothes, humming something under her breath that wasn't quite a lullaby. The child, Little Creek, slept deep. The kind of sleep Boone had only ever seen in people who'd been loved for real. Then the dogs barked. Boone didn't keep dogs, which meant they weren't his. 3 figures broke the tree line by dusk, one tall coat-swinging beard too well trimmed for a mountain man. The others walked behind like shadows, thin, wiry, mean around the eyes. Clara saw them from the window. The pot boiled over. She didn't move. The tall one stepped forward. Hank Reeves. Boone hadn't heard the name before, but he didn't need it to understand. There was a look a man wore when he didn't care what burned, so long as he walked out with what he wanted. He called out, "Clara!" The name cracked against the trees like something dirty. Boone didn't move. Clara stepped beside him, her hand on the doorway, the child pressed to her chest. "I ain't come to fight," Hank said, voice slick as creek mud. "Just came for what's mine." He didn't look at the boy, didn't look at Clara's eyes, just the shape of her, like she was a field someone else had plowed. Boone stepped down off the porch, no rifle, no blade, just the man and the cold. "She ain't yours," Boone said, voice quiet like falling snow. The others shifted, hands to belts. Hank smiled. That kind of smile that thinks it's already won. "I got papers," he said, "got claim, got proof she was mine." Boone didn't blink. Folks around here don't deal in papers. No one moved. Not for a long breath. Then Hank said it, the thing that turned the air to glass. "That child's mine, and I don't mind leaving him behind, but I ain't leaving her." Clara didn't cry. She didn't call out. She just tightened her arm across the boy. Boone stepped forward, boots crunching old snow, and said one thing. "She stays," Hank laughed, drew back his coat, showed a glint of steel. One of the others shifted. Boone didn't flinch. He looked at them like a man looking at a rattlesnake deciding if it's worth stepping on. Hank spit on the ground. "This ain't over," he said, but he didn't step closer. Not that day, not yet. They turned, walked back into the trees. Boone watched until the woods swallowed them whole. Then he walked back inside, took the rifle down, and sat it beside the door. That night he slept on the floor between Clara's room and the fire. Didn't say a word. Didn't need to. The sound in the trees was gone, but it wasn't done. Morning came like a threat. The sky didn't open into blue. It crouched low, gray, thick with something unsaid. Boone stepped outside before light fully settled, eyes raking the tree line like a man counting breaths. Clara stood at the window, baby on her hip, face pale but unflinching. There were no birds. Then came the crunch of snow. Heavy, deliberate, 3 pairs of boots. They didn't call out this time. They walked up like they already owned the land. Hank Reeves at the front, coat open, knife on his belt, smirk wide as prairie sky. Boone didn't speak. He didn't reach for the rifle, didn't shout, didn't warn. He just stepped off the porch, boots steady, like a man walking toward a chore. "You should have handed her over yesterday," Hank said. "Would have saved you trouble." Boone's voice was low, not tired, not angry, just final. Didn't ask to be saved. The other 2 flanked out, circling. Hank moved first. Quick draw, not for the gun, but the knife. He brought it up like he meant to cut a path through flesh and snow. Boone didn't step back. He moved sideways, slow and close. Let the blade slice air, not meat. Then he hit Hank, not with anger, with weight, with silence, with years buried under pine and grief. The punch landed square, sent Hank stumbling. The second blow was worse, bone and will behind it. No fury, just gravity and intention. One of the shadows rushed Boone from the side. Boone turned, caught him mid-charge, drove a knee into the gut, and threw him down like kindling. The third man hesitated. He saw something in Boone's face, a kind of stillness that didn't care if this was the end. That man turned and ran. Hank, blood in his teeth, pushed up again. Boone didn't hit him, just stood there, looking. And that look was colder than fists. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Go," Boone said. And Hank did. Staggered to his feet, spit red into snow, and limped back to the trees. No words from Clara, no applause, no breath of relief. Just the wind. Later, Boone sat on the porch, hand bleeding, quiet as rock. Clara came out with a strip of cloth. She didn't say anything either. She just knelt, wrapped his hand, and left it at that. The baby cried once, then went quiet again. Nothing was fixed, but something had been decided. Boone hadn't fought to win. He'd fought so she wouldn't have to. The snow didn't stop falling. It just changed shape. Fine. Soft now. like ash that forgot its fire. Clara sat by the hearth that night. Her sewing needle moved slow, steady, quiet. No one asked what she was stitching, though Boone saw the fabric, his old coat torn at the elbows, frayed where years had rubbed it thin. She'd taken the lining out, patched it with a square from her own shawl. In the crib, the baby slept with a fist curled near its mouth. Boone didn't talk much since the fight. He'd said what needed saying with fists, and whatever was left, he left to the wood he chopped. That night, Boone didn't come in for supper. He stayed out by the shed, sharpening tools, even though the edge was already clean. Clara ate alone. 3 bowls, 1 left untouched. In the morning, Boone found the coat. It was folded neatly on the edge of his bed. The worn sleeves now mended, lined with a warmth that wasn't his. It smelled of soap and wood smoke and something quieter. Under it, a note, no words, just a single blue thread pinned to the collar, the same thread she'd used to mend the baby's swaddle weeks ago. Boone held the coat for a long time before putting it on. It didn't fit like before. It held the shape of something softer. Outside, Clara stood by the tree line, a satchel on her shoulder, the baby bundled tight. She didn't say goodbye. Boone walked up behind her, boots crunching the frost, stopped within arm's reach. "You leavin'?" he asked. Clara didn't turn. "Thought I might." "Thought so," he said. Wind moved through the branches, not loud, just enough to make them whisper. "I ain't gonna stop you," Boone said. "I know," she said. He looked at the baby, the little face scrunched against the cold. Then he took off the coat, the one she'd sewn, and draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her. "Keep it," he said. "Gets colder before it gets warm." She didn't argue, didn't say thank you, didn't cry. She just turned, looked him in the eye for the first time in days, and said, "You never asked his name." Boone looked at the child, at the coat, at the sky above them both. "Don't need to," he said, and walked back to the house. She stood there long after he disappeared behind the door. Snow clung to her lashes. The baby slept on, and though her feet didn't move, something in her had already taken a step. The snow melted in patches come March. Not all of it, not the parts that stayed hidden behind the barn or in the crease of the hills, but enough for the ground to show its bones. Boone rose early that day, earlier than usual. The fire had burned out, but he didn't relight it, just pulled on his boots, old things with cracked leather and laces long since gone. His coat, the one Clara mended, hung by the door, still holding her shape, it seemed. He didn't put it on. Instead, he walked out shirt-sleeved into the morning chill, a short knife in one hand, a thick piece of pine board under his arm. Behind the house, near the stream, the trees stood dark and quiet. He sat by the stump, ran a palm over the board, then carved. Slow, careful, not out of pride, or memory, or grief, but because something inside him wouldn't stop trembling until he gave it shape. He carved a name, not hers, not his, the baby's. He didn't ask for permission, didn't wait for approval, just wrote it into the wood as if the earth itself needed to know. Eli Creek McCready. It wasn't fancy. The letters crooked, some deeper than others, but they were there, permanent. He flipped the board, carved another word beneath the name. 3 letters, P.A. Dubais, not father, not dad. Just what a boy might learn to say first, and maybe last. When he finished, Boone sat back. The wind had picked up a bit. The pines swayed but made no sound. Not really, just a hush, like the land was listening. From the porch, a quiet sound. Not boots, not footsteps. Clara stood there, arms crossed over the coat. She hadn't left. No saddle prints in the dirt, no missing food, no empty crib. She watched him, not moving, her face unreadable. Then her gaze dropped to the wood. He didn't speak, didn't invite. But she walked over anyway, knelt beside the stump. Her hand reached out, not for his, but to run her fingers over the carved name. She whispered it, once, just to test how it felt on her tongue. Then her hand found his shoulder, stayed there. No kiss, no promise, no future drawn in words. Just that hand warm against worn flannel. And Boone, rough, silent Boone, lowered his head, just slightly so her hand wouldn't have to stretch. They stayed like that, a man with a new name written in wood, and a woman who chose not to walk away. Sometimes that's all love is, someone who didn't leave. Spring never came all at once in the Timberhorn Mountains. It crept in, like a man too ashamed to knock but too tired to stay away. The snow retreated in streaks. The stream behind the cabin grew louder, fuller. Birds returned, quiet ones, cautious. Boone still rose early, still brewed 3 cups of coffee each morning, one for him, one for Clara, and one for something that couldn't be named. Maybe memory, maybe hope, maybe the idea that not all things must be buried. Clara didn't speak of leaving anymore. She didn't speak of staying either. She hung laundry by the stream, small clothes now added to the line. She made soup with wild onions and wild silence. She smiled sometimes, but only when no one was looking. The child, Eli, grew fast, laughed hard, slept warm between them on cold nights. He reached out for Boone without fear, called him Paw without being told. Boone never corrected him. The wolves never came back. Some evenings Boone would step onto the porch and just sit. Hat low, boots still muddy from chopping wood. The wind talked more than he did. Clara would join him sometimes. Not always. Sometimes she'd stay inside, rocking the baby, or mending his old coat again, even though it didn't need fixing. But when she came out, she never brought words. Just her presence, just the sound of her breathing beside him. One evening, as the sky burned the color of blood and ash, Clara brought something wrapped in cloth. She laid it on the porch between them. A handkerchief. Old, worn. Boone knew it. He'd kept it once when she dropped it weeks ago. She said nothing. Neither did he, but he reached out, unfolded the cloth, then folded it again, neatly, and placed it in his breast pocket, like it meant something sacred, like it was a vow. They never married, never kissed in front of the fire like in those town stories, but she stopped calling him Mr. McCready, and he stopped pouring out the 3rd cup. It stayed full now, every morning, for whoever stayed, for whatever stayed. The cabin still creaked when the wind hit it, just right. The trees still groaned. Life didn't soften, it only became bearable, because someone didn't leave, and someone else didn't ask them to. In the Timberhorn Mountains, folks in town would talk, now and again, about the quiet man who once lived alone, about the woman who showed up one day and never left, about the boy with a name carved in wood. But they never got the story right, because it wasn't a story for words. It was something that lived in the silences between them, where no name was needed, and none ever spoken.